order the study session for the Sumner County Board of Education for Tuesday, March the 4th, 2025. Before we begin, I'll stand for a moment of silence, followed by a pledge to our flag. If you'd like to join me, please feel free. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, call to order the March 4th, 2025 study session for the Sumner County Board of Education. First item on the agenda is the budget strategic planning.
We did 5 budget meetings this morning, starting at 8 o'clock, and then we did 8 principal interviews. We finished at 5:50, so we're scrambling a little bit to get everything, but we'll go ahead and get started. And Renee ran it to get some handouts, but we'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to, I know that for our new board members that went to the TSBA meeting, you talked a lot about strategic planning, and then we've talked about getting ready for budget season and walking through, like not just walking in and dropping a massive budget a week or two before you vote to send it to the commission, but kind of trying to break apart what we can. And so tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about strategic planning and specifically on the financial side, and then walk through there's a lot of information spreading, and there are a lot of, we've told over the last 9 days, we've done 53 budget meetings with principals. So we've spent somewhere around 45 minutes or an hour with each principal for the last week. And so, it's not July, I know it's March, but I didn't change that. There we go. All right, so I wanted to just run through and talk like how we go about building a budget. And I will say we've got Ms. Brown will be back in a moment, Amanda, and then Trevor is down there, and Rhonda and their team do an absolutely amazing job of putting all the numbers together for us. Building a budget is a monumental task. But what I want to talk about today is not the inner workings of the budget, because it's still too early for that. But I just want to give you kind of a strategic overview of how we do the budget, because we will get somewhere around $400 million worth of budget requests, all of which are valid, and we'll have about $300 million to spend. So how do we go about making the decision what to do and what not to do? And that is probably the biggest, the most important strategic decision, the most important strategic decisions that we make. We believe for a long time that if you believe something's true and valuable and important in education, it's not enough to be a platitude, it has to be in the budget book. If you don't fund it and you don't fund it recurringly, then you don't believe it. And I think also we try to ground that work in, the pictures that you'll see in the slide deck tonight, which I will update for future presentations, but these are our kids. And the decisions that we make, I think one of the great joys of working in schools is you get to see that the money that we put into budget items goes to directly benefit the lives of our kids. And I am thankful, like after 53 budget meetings, after spending about most of the last 9 days either doing interviews or doing budget meetings with my team, to be able to sit, I know a lot of places you don't have a group of people that come every day, bring a lunch pail, and work hard to make a difference in the lives of kids. They overlook certain things, like I was going to buy pizza one day. I was so happy to honor them for their work. I did it on Uber Eats, and I sent it to my house instead of here. So we didn't get that pizza. They overlooked that mistake. But anyway, I will say each day throughout this process that they bring they bring a work ethic and a drive that shows in their love and heart for kids, and I'm thankful for them. Were there some 11 by 17 copies too? Okay, do that. Okay, do that. Okay, thank you. All right. So this was our guiding question last year, and I like it to guide our budget work. How are we providing the best pre-K through 12th grade education for all Sumner County students? That's a question we ask every day, but especially when we start talking about budget decisions. I wanted to run quickly through our budget process and our strategic. This isn't just budget, this is strategic planning. I think I shared with you all in an earlier session that strategic planning in a school goes on continuously. It operates at different levels. It operates, our teachers make strategic decisions by making decisions about what they teach and what they don't teach and how they teach it and how they measure success and how long they spend on different topics. Our principals certainly make strategic decisions all the time, every day, with how they allocate the resources that they have, how they decide who teaches what, how they address concerns in the community or with parents. And we have the same thing here. How do we manage resources to ensure that every student in Sumner County receives a great education? One way that we have shifted over the last 2 years and expanded is the number of touch points we have with our principals in schools. So in July and August, we met with principal triads. Ms. Skinner and I met with all 53 principals. We intentionally put them in groups of 3. We tried to get principals that are in similar areas, similar age demographics, similar connections. If you study the research now, one of the things it shows is leadership in education is not just in education, but especially in education, is a lonely endeavor, especially for principals. We talk all the time about collaboration. We know in the classroom we're at our best when kids are collaborating with each other, when teachers are collaborating with each other. The same is true for principals and for the central office. So how do we cultivate collaboration? One of the problems that we identified is typically we bring everybody up here for principal meetings and we put collaboration time at the end, and they had so much to do, they would typically bypass the collaborative time to get back to their school because something had always happened. And that's truer words never spoken. Something always happens when principals out of the building. So we tried to start this by building some intentional networks of principals in groups of 3. That also let us meet with all 53 principals in about 2 weeks. If we go and meet at the school with each individual principal, it takes about a month and a half to hit all 53. Yeah, we've done that too. So we met with the triads in July and August, and we challenged them to look at their budget needs, but also to think strategically about what goals they wanted to set. And we pushed them this year not just to think about, like, how do I increase our reading or math scores, but to think about what do I want to do, like what drives us as a school to make better people, to help kids identify what they want to do in the future. Yes, to have the same high standards in academics, but then to begin to understand what they want to do in life and how they become good people. And they set those goals, and when they came in to us in September, we meet with all 53 principals in a strategic planning meeting with most of my cabinet. And we sit around for an hour each and talk about what their strategic goals are, what resources they need in September, and then we identify maintenance and capital projects so that Andy's team and Chris Harrison can start working on getting that done. Mr. Ott started in September, follow-up compensation committee meeting. Compensation 2.0, you saw that presentation in January. The first one led to a $29 million increase in compensation, historic amount of money invested into lifting the wages of especially our classified employees. It's made a huge impact. Again, at a later date, as we get closer to budget, we'll share with you the impact that compensation has had on our hiring and retention. It's made a big difference. Then November to December, we did follow-up planning meetings with our principal triads to check in and see where they were mid-year. As I just mentioned, February, March, we've done school budget meetings for the last 9 days. And really before March, really probably in January through May, it's a sprint. Ms. Brown and her team will spend long hours every day between now and May getting the budget together. It's a tremendous amount of work with a lot of moving parts. May, we will present the budget to the school board for feedback and ultimately a vote, and then in June it will go to the county commission. I will say, I think I really want to tip my hat to the commission, especially to education and budget committees. They worked really hard to coordinate with us, You know, last year we had the discrepancy, and thank you. We had the discrepancy in what our revenue was and the way that we calculated. I appreciate Commissioner Schoaf spelling that out the other night, last week at the commission meeting. And then he addressed to actually give revenue estimates in February, March, and April as they look at the ongoing, we typically, what we have done historically in Sumner County, Mr. Lawing and his team have done a great job of projecting revenue conservatively. So typically we bring in more money than we project we're going to. That's how you build reserves, and that's a healthy thing. What you don't want to do is budget liberally or project revenue liberally and spend money that you haven't collected yet. That's a problem. And Mr. Lawing has always done a great job of projecting conservatively. But even when you do that, we get a lot more sales tax revenue now than we have in the past, and there's a little bit more fluctuation. Property tax revenue is consistent, but I appreciate the work that they've done, and they gave us an estimate last week. It's the earliest we've ever gotten an estimate. I think it shows a real commitment on the part of the Education and Budget Committee to work with us to be able to get a budget done, turned in on time, because it's a real extraordinary amount of extra work on the county finance teams, schools and county, if we go on to continuation in July and August. So we want to try everything in our power to get the budget done in June. And I'll just be very truthful with you what I think that means, especially I know everybody would like to see us take our wages as high as we possibly could. We want to be able to do that this year and next year and the following year and be as close to revenue neutral as possible. We plan on building a budget that aligns with the revenue estimates that we've received. We're not gonna send, my recommendation to you is not to send the commission a budget that requires extra revenue, to live within the means that are set forth that we know pretty close now. And so I want to walk through, because part of what makes it hard to have conversation about school finances is exceedingly complex. There's nothing easy about it. I wanted to highlight, we've tweaked our goals and adapted them a little bit. This is not just budget, this is more of a strategic plan. And I'm going to share a document with you in a second, not to do tonight, but if you want to look at and you want to make some contributions, if you'd like to talk to your principals and constituents and jot some things down and give it to us, I would love to have that. I would love to have that feedback. But this is where we believe that our work is. We teach our students. I would like, a big topic of conversation over the last 2 decades has been intervention. I think intervention is absolutely necessary, but I think it's driven a conversation where sometimes we stigmatize kids or label kids or focus our efforts at the median or underneath the median, instead of looking at all kids. I want us to shift our language to, instead of saying intervene, we want to coach. We want to coach our students to overcome obstacles, achieve success, and become healthy, productive citizens. I believe all of those things strongly. I believe that every one of our kids can learn, they just start at different places. So, I would say one of the things that we've seen with our Course Mojo pilot is it jumps in and it finds kids that are way below the depth of the standard and it lifts them up. But it also takes kids that are way above the standard and pushes them higher. And that's what I want us to see. If you think about this in athletic terms, if you have a D1 athlete, you don't want them to flounder because you're not providing them the coaching that they need. If you have an athlete that's just on the team because they want to be a part and wear a jersey, you still want them to get better. Just like, if you've ever watched middle school band, 6th grade band is the most remarkable activity you can ever see. Because at the start, I don't know how else to describe it except it's kind of god-awful. But by the end of the first semester, when you go and hear their Christmas concert, those kids have improved dramatically. And it's because the band director has started with them wherever they were. Some kids have already had lessons and they're really good. Other kids, especially clarinetists, I don't know if clarinetist is the right word, but kids playing the clarinet take longer. It's rough at first, but they get better because they're coached from where they are to where they can go. And some kids, decide that band's not for them, and that's okay, or course isn't for them, but they have the opportunity and they took the shot and they learn a lot about grit and determination by doing something they're not naturally gifted at. So all kids are going to face obstacles regardless of where they start on the spectrum. How do we coach them to be able to overcome those? How do we help them identify and achieve success? How do we help them become healthy, productive citizens? We prepare our students for their first and future careers. Our kids face a job market and a world that's more insecure and unstable at any time since probably World War I, prior to World War I. We've got to prepare kids to have grit, determination, but also be able to understand that the job market is going to change rapidly. What's coming with AI is going to be like the fourth industrial revolution. It's going to change jobs and then change them again and change them again and change them again. The good news for Tennessee is that early data looks like it's going to create way more jobs in Tennessee than it's going to take away. But we got to prepare our kids to be able to fill those jobs. We aspire for each student to build grit, a sense of mission, growth mindset, and humility. This is something that my team has worked on this year. Like, what are the 4 core values that define what Sumner County Schools is? We started with an activity to identify the people that we would hold up in each of our departments and schools that epitomize the very best of Sumner County Schools. And we said, what traits do they share in common? And this is what we came up with. And, and if you look at that when you hire, if you hire around these values, you rarely miss. And that's something that we actually, in the interviews that we've been doing today for principal, one of the questions we asked is, these are our 4 core values. How do you find that you implementing those and living those, and living to embody those? We innovate to create new opportunities for our students and greater efficiency for our leaders and staff. Our teachers, staff, and leaders carry a huge burden. It's grown significantly each year. We are very lean staffed for a school district our size, and we have to look at some of those things. Part of the process of budget meetings is to sit there and try to find an equitable way to determine who gets staff and when, because we don't have some things that a lot of other districts do. Most districts, every elementary school has an assistant principal. We don't. We have a lot of different staffing. We've made decisions to stay lean at the top and to push as many resources out as possible into the schools. And there are some real strengths to that. There are also some trade-offs. And trying to balance that so that we can support students, first and foremost, teachers, staff, leaders, in that order is really important. And the sheet that I'm going to give you, since y'all are forward-facing and talk a lot to the community, this will be something that principals will do too, is to think about how do we support parents. I've gotten some heartbreaking emails over the last few weeks of kids that have gotten in trouble, especially middle school kids that have gotten in trouble. The first thing you have to tell a parent of a middle schooler is there is no limit on what a group of 8th grade boys can come up with to do. They will defy rationality and logic. So sometimes when you try to figure it out, you have to set those aside. But what we see, we've talked a lot before about things like THC vapes, catfishing, social media. It's relentless for kids. Like, I really hope, and I would not have said this 6 months ago, I really hope the legislature passes the bill to take cell phones out of schools. I think it might be the best thing we could do. I think the amount of evidence that's piling up on the long-term effects of cell phone use in kids is staggering. It may be more harmful than what we discovered, 2 generations ago with cigarette smoke. It's something that, we can set the standard for what we want to do as a school district. If the state does that, then we will eagerly comply and try to move forward and provide space for our kids to be kids. I think that's very important. I think we can play a big role in helping provide resources and information to parents. Some of the emails that I've received from parents is, I just didn't know. And we've got principals, and we've got Ms. Brown, Katie Brown's team that has all this information. How do we make the connection to connect parents to this information? Because I do think that parents want to know. Parents want to do the best by their kids. And if you've got grandparents and great-grandparents sometimes raising kids, they don't know how easy it is to get a vape. They don't know what kids are facing when they come home and they've got these. They don't know the world that they're opening up to. For all the concern about what our kids are being exposed to, the most dangerous thing we put in the hands of a kid is a cell phone that's unregulated. And I think those are big conversations for us to have, not just as a school board and school system, but as a community. And so I would put that in any strategic plan that we do. And I'm going to share this. This is the strategic planning document that I referenced in. This is pretty much what I just walked through, but I wanted to give it to y'all. I would really appreciate if you want to put some comments on there. And if you want, I can send you an electronic version of it, and then you can just type that in and submit it back. I'd love to get that feedback so that we can build that as we're doing our budget and strategic planning practice. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit, when you come into making budget decisions, hardest part for a school system is that, you know, we won't know fully how much revenue we're going to have until close to the end of the budget process. So Ms. Brown and her team do a great job of trying to project out what our revenue is. So I want to walk through some of that now with you and address some of the conceptions and misconceptions that are out there. All right, so we've got, we will get each month between now and June a run of the money that we will get from TISA. So these numbers are all based on the governor's budget passing without modification. So if the governor's budget gets amended, it could go up, it could go down. Most of the time it goes down. Okay, so this is currently looking at what we're going to get from TISA for fiscal year 2026. It's about 7.3 million more than what we got last year. Okay, it's a nice increase. We're very thankful for that. I would seriously say there's a lot of commentary about our state legislators and our governor. Look at the money that they have put into K-12 education over the last decade. It's significant, and we owe them our gratitude for doing that. And I thank them all the time. I share my opinions on other things, like amount of time in recess, that I don't think is wise. But I mean, I'm all for recess, but at a certain point, we only have a certain amount of time in school. We can't put more stuff required than we have minutes in the school day. But I do think that we owe them a debt of gratitude for the amount of money that they have pushed in over the last decade. I want to highlight this because this is where TISA is different than BEP. That's different from funding formulas we've used previously. You know, the governor did say that we're going to hit 50,000, but that's a year out. So what the legislature is doing is putting $125 million each year in TISA, with a percentage of that required to go towards teacher pay raises. All right, so what we are required to increase teacher pay raises this year is $3.9 million. If you remember, Ms. Brown, not to put you on the spot, I believe that going up to 50,500 was a little bit over 11 million. Yeah, I'll look that up in a minute, but I believe it's around 11 million. So you can see that for us to go above 50,000 this year is significantly higher than the money that we will receive pigeonholed in, even the 7.3 million that we'll receive overall. The 7.3 million includes everything that the state gives us for a whole host of different things. And I'll show you that. I'm going to share this with you. It's incredibly complicated, but I am happy. This is our TISA worksheet that we receive each month. And I apologize, I will try to make it bigger next month. It's a little small, but I've got slides, so I'll highlight some of it for you. Okay, so here are some of the funding variables that are in play right now. So keep in mind, this is with everything that's proposed passing. Okay, one place where we can take a pretty big hit is in this economic disadvantaged hold harmless. Okay, I've mentioned this to you before. The state we put in through free and reduced lunch forms at the school level that determined what our number of economically disadvantaged students were. Ms. Skinner, jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, if I misstate here. A couple years ago, the state went to direct certification, which means that we still do free and reduced lunch forms, but the kids that count as economically disadvantaged are the ones that are direct certified by the state into programs like food stamps. All right, so when they pulled TISA numbers a couple years ago for the first time, it did push a significant amount of new money into schools. We got around $32 million the first year in new dollars. In the funding formula, everything in TISA, you will hear people that have been doing this for a while, you'll hear them talk about BEP. BEP was a crazy formula that no one understood, where they dropped a certain amount of money. It funded about 60% of the teachers, but not all teachers, and it was hard to understand, hard to explain. TISA is connected directly to individual students. So if you've worked in healthcare, probably the easiest way to understand this is if you go to the hospital, a nurse or someone at the hospital is going to scan everything that you take, and you're going to be charged for it. The reverse of that is TISA, where there are different categories of stuff that we put in. There's a base where we get, what's proposed in the governor's budget is that we get $7,295 per student. Okay? Economically disadvantaged, you take 25% of that $7,295 and you get that amount of money for each student that's classified economically disadvantaged. So when they first pulled our numbers a couple years ago, our number was around 5,600. All right, now our numbers are a little right around 4,000. So the hit that we could take is around 3 million. We've had about a 30% drop on the way that the state is pulling this data. We've had about a 30% drop in economically disadvantaged students. If you look at our free and reduced lunch numbers, it's dropped some, but not 30%.
I think it's increased in the places actually.
Yeah, it's a weird time in Sumner County. We're getting more affluent and poorer in spots at the same time. But if you talk to schools, we don't have fewer economically disadvantaged kids. We also don't have a run where about almost every district in the state of Tennessee lost about the same percentage of students without there being, that just doesn't happen, but that's an anomaly that we're going to have to live with. What they have done is put a bill forward that if it passes, will give us the money back for 75% of the difference. So for us, where we would have lost about 3.1 million, we're only going to lose about 800,000 or 900,000, so we will recoup about 2.19 million. So we need that bill to pass. We need that not to be amended out of the governor's budget because, you know, if you talk about 7.3 million increase versus taking 2.19 million away from that, that's a big hit. All right, on your TISA sheet, I've highlighted these. In the second column, you'll see Sumner fiscal year 25 fiscal capacity, 2.63%. CTES sets this each year in April. We have asked that they set that in April, but it doesn't go into effect until the following year. Because last year they set it in April and we lost, was it, I think, $1.3 million because that number went from 2.59 to 2.63. So small changes in that measure of what our fiscal capacity is. It's based on how they rate us as an affluent community. So the more affluent your community is, the higher that number goes and the less state money you get. You're expected to make a larger local contribution based on the affluence of your community. So the suburban counties around Nashville got hit pretty hard by this last year because it was the first time they'd set it and it went up. We are hopeful that that big jump was caught because it hadn't been caught in a couple years and that the number will stay around 2.63. But just understand if that goes up to 2.64 or 2.65, that will be money that will also come out of that 7.3 million. All right. So I wanted to share just a little bit about. I've kind of already hit this, so I'm going to move through this pretty much. It's basically like there's 3.9 million of this state money, that 209 million that's reserved has to be designated towards teacher raises. Okay, so we're well, with what we've already approved to work on that we're going to build into our budget, we are well above that 3.9 million. Okay. All right, and then our maintenance of effort last year, if you remember, this was a sticking point, not really a sticking point. I had calculated the way we had always done it. Mr. Schoaf was resetting it to equally valid steps, and I appreciate the fact that he has said that repeatedly from the floor of the commission, came over here and said it. We just missed each other, and that's why he's taken steps this year to give us our revenue estimates ahead of time in February, March, and April. So our current maintenance of effort is 134 million. All right, so our projected county revenue after the budget meeting the other night is $140,062,553. It's a little bit over $6 million because it includes things other than just the two main things that we receive are property tax and sales tax, but there are a bunch of other things like liquor tax and some portion of the wheel tax, different things like that come into it. So it's quite, Mr. Lawing gives us this number each month, and I emailed him today, and based on the commission meeting and the amendment offered last week at the commission meeting, this is what our current projected revenue from the county looks like. All right, there were some questions the other night because the comptroller drops a report every year that tells you what your reserve is. Okay, and every year we have a conversation about what that means. right? Like, there is not, I wish that the Lord would bless us with a reserve fund with $143 million that we could tap into. If you know where that $143 million is, please tell me, because we will go get it and we will deposit it and we will all be happy and we will meet all of our budget goals for everybody this year. All right, but that's because the way the comptroller does their report is they're looking at, and Trevor, jump in, correct me if I'm wrong here, what the comptroller is doing is accounting for all the resources and funds that you have in the total count. Okay, so let me run through quickly. This is the comptroller's report for the last fiscal year that we got at the, our budget year is July 1 through June 30th. All right, so this is the report that we got from the comptroller's office that was referenced the other night, that we had $143 million in reserve. Okay, of that $143 million, you can see a lot of these are in restricted accounts that we can't touch. Okay, so you can see, for instance, internal school inventory. That's stuff that schools hold, everything from T-shirts to Cheez-Its to, water, whatever else it might be that they have. Because believe it or not, if you run the soccer concession stand on a Monday night, you count everything at the start and you count everything at the end, and we account for that. So if they have leftover inventory, that's that amount, $47,729. GP prepaid, that's invoices that have been paid, but the expense is recognized in a future period. I would guess, Ms. Brown, this would be contracts that stretch over 1 year, Amanda? Software, things like that. All right, internal school restricted, $7.6 million. This is money that is held in individual school banking accounts. All right, so for instance, your band will raise money. Your band account, you may have a band booster, an SSO that's separate, but the band will also have money. They may be saving up for something. They might have $60,000 in that account. We don't empty that account at the end of the year. We carry it over. Schools also have instructional funds that we don't take away from them at the end of the year, right? Because similarly, they may be saving to buy something big, and so they don't spend. We do try to encourage them to spend almost all their instructional money every year. And that's been a consistent thing from my first budget meeting. I came to my first budget meeting in 2015 as a principal, terrified that I was going to run out of money, and I didn't want to be that principal. So I spent almost no money the first 6-7 months, and Ms. Brown corrected me, a move she's regretted forever since, about not spending money. We do encourage our schools to spend the money, and they do a really good job, but our schools are big organizations, and they're running a lot. So this is all the money that schools are collecting from students in concessions, in gates, in field trips, and everything else. That's the money that's held over and carried over. So that's about $7.6 million. Federal projects restricted. This is carryover from a federal grant that's used in the next year. You can only spend that on that grant. GP restricted. This is money that's held in child care, preschools, and other grant restricted funds. So for instance, our child care and daycares, they collect money from parents, and that money has to be spent on the kids in that daycare. So if they have, we don't want them to be running in the negative or at zero, because they have to make payroll and they're revenue neutral. Like we can't bail out a daycare from school funds. It has to be self-funded. So school nutrition restricted. This is money that came in. Each month now we're approving a lot of capital items for cafeterias. During COVID, when the government paid for every kid to eat, we collected a lot of money in school nutrition. There are two problems that you'll see in school nutrition. One is like we have to spend down this money, which we're trying to do in updating our cafeterias. The other thing is we feed every kid that's hungry. We don't turn a kid away. Increasingly, that's requiring us to take on around $400,000 or $500,000 a year in debt from families that don't pay for their children's lunches. We, to this point, have always just eaten that and paid for it because we don't want a kid to go hungry. All right? There's a balance there somewhere that we have to find between responsibility for families and us making sure that kids, because you don't want just kids to go hungry. We also don't want, if everybody else is eating a school lunch or bringing lunch from home, We don't want them to have to go to the office and make a peanut butter sandwich, you know. So trying to find that many, but you can't pay for those lunches out of this $9.8 million, right? That would violate federal law in practice. So that's why you will see a lot of that money will be spent down on capital items as we update our cafeterias, which is great because we have a lot of capital needs in our school cafeterias. And they've begun to spend that down. Restricted hybrid stabilization. This is cash held in TCRS custody to offset future contribution rate increases. We don't find out necessarily, and Ms. Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't necessarily find out what the rates for TCRS are going to be in the time that we build our budget. It can change. And when you think about stuff like retirement, that can be a significant swing.
Yeah, this is actually.
Can you turn your microphone on?
This is an actuarial determined value that is given to us that we have to book. So this isn't
It's not anything we said.
correct. It's an actuarial value that they do. But the rates, we do get the rates typically between now and April for our TCRS, which you'll see our expenditures fluctuate based on the rates that we get from TCRS.
All right, the 56 million was the big one that we put in there last year, budgeted expenditures over revenue from the fiscal 25 budget. So if you remember this budget, we put 20-something million in capital and another 29 in compensation. That came out of reserves. So that has to be pigeonholed and held because we're spending that, okay, over the course of this year. 9.4 million was what came out of phase 1 athletic projects that we didn't spend last year, okay? So we tried to get everything done when we couldn't get the steel for the bleachers. We held on to that money, rolled it forward, and it's being expended on capital projects this year. So that money will be gone at the end of the year. Federal projects committed. So federal money works this way. Like you will approve in the budget, you'll approve a separate slate of federal budgets, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. Title I is probably the one you're the most familiar with. Title I is the one like our economically disadvantaged schools. They receive additional money that's funded at the school level, a little bit at the district level, to meet the needs of our kids in economically disadvantaged schools. Title II funds things to train and develop teachers at the building level. Title III is EL and some other student populations there. And Title IV is a lot of the stuff in Katie's world with safety, counseling, different student health and social needs. So that comes out, emotional self needs. So that comes out of Title IV. All right, the way that works is we have to spend the money first and then they reimburse us. And we can't go negative in that account. So we have to have a pot of money that sits there so that when we make purchases out of federal money, that we don't go below zero because that's a major rule violation, law
And we
violation.
can't hold funds more than 3 days. So we
Okay.
have a very narrow window.
Yeah.
We have to forecast that
Yeah.
to draw those funds down. But we're always drawing those after the fact. Or
Yeah. So that's the reason that $1 million is there. Assigned for education, 10.6 million. This is encumbrances of purchase orders issued to vendors and items not received. So for instance, we've got, I would guess, Ms. Brown, a lot of this money is tied up in our ISM, our innovative schools, because, we've ordered a lot of stuff for our CTE classrooms. Some of that equipment takes 12, 14 months. Sometimes we order a bus and it takes 18 months to come in.
And any of those projects we didn't start the major projects.
Yeah, and some of the athletic facility projects. So those are projects where we've encumbered the money, but we haven't paid it out yet because we haven't received the product. And then 12 million is we have to keep 3% of our budgeted operating expenditures in fund balance, and that's state law. So that leaves us with 26.1 million in our remaining fund balance. That's unrestricted money. So last year we were able to pull out of that the 15.8 million that we used to fund athletic facilities. Thank you, Frankie. It's cold in here. But anyway, that's what money that we have, $26 million that's unrestricted. Does not mean that we need to budget and spend that. As Trevor shared with me, walked me through the comptroller's report, they encourage us to have 2 months operational expenses in reserve. At a minimum, we have to do a cash flow analysis if we drop below 15%. Right now, with that 26 million, we're about 15%. So we need to, that's a good number for us to sit at. Right, when you think it costs about $1.8, $1.9 million a day to run Sumner County schools, that's not a long time on our reserves. And I'll just show, I won't spend as much time, but this is the, I think some of my headers must have gotten cut off. This is the fiscal year 2023 comptroller's report. So if you go back a year, you'll see that number was 125.9 million. And you can see, I won't go through, but you can see it was basically the same breakdown. The difference there is we had 29 million and 27 million committed for education. We had the 29 million budgeted for expenditures over revenue from the previous year's budget. And then we had board allocated reserves, but that was 27 million that we held in reserve. So if you look at that, that's where last year we got that number of about 57 million that we felt comfortable spending out of when we pulled the 15.8. So I just want to say those are very similar lines, and we tend to move in about the same path.
Mr. Lancaster?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, got a question on the state money that we were talking about earlier, the 7.3.
Yes.
Part of the voucher bill included capital money, supposedly from lottery. Do we know when? Will we be able to budget any of that? Will we know when that is, or is that going to be something that we'll get?
We haven't really gotten any clarification on what that's going to be yet.
Okay, so we don't. That's not anything part of TISA. It's kind of a.
I don't think so.
Okay, that's.
There's really not a way. This is the kind of thing where I think the legislature and the state is, they still kind of have a BEP mindset, because in BEP you just throw more money in there and say we want you to designate some of this for capital, some of this for this. TISA is purely student-based funding, so there's a little bit of a transition in their thinking about, like, if you want to fund it at the school level, you got to put it in TISA and then kind of dog ear like they've done for teacher raises. Mr. Lancaster, I did mean to tell you, your question last month about that is tied to this is in the voucher bill, in the scholarship bill, it mentions the $2,000 bonus for teachers. We have to pass a resolution saying that the money will go to teachers by June. It will not be allocated by the state until next budget year. So we won't be able to pay that money until July or August, which is going to be fun for Ms. Brown's team. Because we're going to leave employees that leave the system, we'll have to leave them open so we can pay them that money.
And that money, that $2,000 is all state, right?
All
The
state.
county doesn't have to pay any of that.
No, I mean, I think what I will say that I'm thankful for them doing is in the past, we've gotten we've gotten things that are supposed to be paid directly to teachers, and it doesn't cover all the teachers. This will cover, the reason it's taken on is they're covering the back end work to get the exact number of teachers that it applies to. The question is how far out are they going to take that? Is it going to apply to counselors? Is it going to apply to, we consider all certified employees, we treat them like teachers. How far out does that go? It does not include classified employees. Historically, if we've done something for one, we try to do it for everybody. So trying to piece through all that. The one thing that I will want us to be very clear when we do the resolution to message is that $2,000 is not $2,000. You're not going to get a check for $2,000 because it's going to have to pull out all the benefits and taxes and all that. It'll be like $1,400-1,500.
Okay. So right now, though, compared to last year, we're looking at 13.3 million or so if we don't take the $2 million hit from the economic disadvantage, and if that fiscal capacity number does not go up or change.
Right. Right. And and we were
or if anything else comes out.
We were at 12 votes at the commission the other night to set us down to maintenance of effort, which would have taken,
So my next question is, if we're 13, and I know we said 11, it's going to take 11 to pay the increase. What are we, I know last year one thing we had brought up was we didn't know if we would be able to continue to do supplies. Are
Schools-
we at that point now where we're thinking, I mean, have y'all had that discussion, you know, because,
Yeah, I mean, that money's not there. We'd like to think about how to message that out.
Right.
We still have a lot of school supplies. About, are we gonna do school supplies next year? I got it. We're good.
Sorry, I'm having an anxiety attack right now.
We'll worry about the bonus, because it may, remember that we're in a legislative session, and the bonus, the way they do the bonus could change, so, yeah.
We're working on a plan.
Yeah. So, yes, if we did, you know, in the past, when we were running it out of ESSER, the school supply money was between 1.5 and 1.8 million.
okay.
We did
I
not
knew
budget it.
I knew it was a pretty big chunk, and I knew that was gonna be a kind of a low-hanging fruit that if we, when we, you know, if we got to it, that would be something that would.
We are looking at it, not completely ready to say that we're not gonna do it, but knowing that we gotta do something pretty quickly to communicate. Ms. York is collecting information to see what our surplus of school supplies is, because, you know, we drop ship that to the schools. For instance, some schools have a ton of folders, some have a ton of pencils, right? Because you gotta remember, first school supplies has to be tacked under the pencils. But, yeah, that's a conversation for us to have, but I mean, it's a substantial amount of money.
Okay. I think just, you know, the biggest thing on that is
Message.
messaging, but also letting people know early. Like, we don't
Yeah.
want to be
No, I think we.
June and saying, hey. you
No,
know.
I think we'd be able to do that in the next month.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's really, if y'all, do you have any questions about strategic planning or budget? I know, man, that's where our revenues sit right now. I just want to be very, I appreciate the commission's step. I appreciate Commissioner Shove, Mr. Hyde, Mr. Lawing putting forward what our revenues are. Last year, we didn't get those revenues until, I mean, a lot of that was because of the tax assessment and everything like that. It was just kind of a weird year last year with a whole lot of moving parts. But, you know, let me say again, Mr. Shove has dealt in good faith from the start. Mr. Hyde's been really helpful, and Mr. Becker on education has been very helpful. There's a lot of goodwill, I would say now, between the school board and the county commission. I think you've seen that when we've gone on our school tours. Those have been really, really productive. Looking forward to hitting another school cluster, kind of hit Hunter and White House next time. So a little bit of Beach and White House next time.
Mr. Lancaster.
Yeah, sorry, I got another question. So last year, we're trying to plan how we're doing this again. So we've done our compensation meeting
Mhm.
that we, you know, when we kind of did that last year. But last year in either March or April, we had a capital discussion with budget.
Yeah.
And kind of said, hey, this is what we're planning for next year. This is the you know, the big ticket items that we think, are we gonna see that?
April study session is what I was thinking.
Okay.
We just finished these budget meetings with principals. Like, we'll get, next Tuesday, we open the bids on North Sumner Elementary. You know, we increased the budget from 800 to $1 million, especially after seeing when the last bids came in. But, you know, construction bids are all over the place right now. So I don't feel confident about where that's going to come in. We want to do it, but if we do that, if it comes in at 1.6, then that's 400, you know, it's $600,000 of projects elsewhere we're going to have to cut. So, or kick to next year. So I think that, Mr. Lancaster, I'd like to get that bid in, and then we'll have a better feel on what we can get done this year. And Mr. Brown is working on, I talked to him this morning, he's working on yesterday, he's working on a 5-year plan, and we're gonna try to look at that at the district and at the school level, so y'all can have a little bit more visibility about where, especially around those big ticket items like roofs, HVAC, lighting, paving, you know, the things that we know are ongoing. And you know, sometimes you look like we've got some schools that are gonna be a little bit longer term, that are gonna take more than we can budget for. It's got to be a conversation at some point about a bond or something like that. Like Merrill Hyde Magnet, if we're gonna continue to use that as a school, needs extensive work. Ellis Middle School needs extensive work. You know, like a Westmoreland Middle needs, some of these schools that are 50, 60 years old, Gallatin High School, there's got to be some significant work done to update, and we're going to have those conversations. But that's, you know, if we're looking at that on the capital plan, we can say this is now, this is next year, this is a couple years out. But yeah, so I think we'll need until April.
But at the end of the day, I guess my biggest question is, or my concern always is, when my first budget vote, we got it a week beforehand and
Yeah.
voted on it the next week.
Right.
We already kind of know, the biggest thing on there is salaries, and we already kind of know a good idea what that
Yeah.
is. And the next biggest thing is capital. If we have that in April, then we've got, the greater part of it.
Yeah.
Kind of at least discussed, talked about, have an idea of, can kind of field questions for a month or so, or a few weeks before
Yeah.
we get the final.
And I think the challenge right now for us is these revenue numbers move even sometimes after we approve our budget. And so that's one of the reasons why we tried to carry a healthy reserve, so you didn't have to worry about, what you don't want to do is come back in July and work on a new budget to revise down because we took a revenue hit. So that's but yeah, I think capital and compensation are always going to be our two. I would go ahead and plan on our capital investment's going to go down quite dramatically from the last 2 years.
Well, yeah, it would have to. But
It's got to.
But I guess my other thought is have on there, so we know what we can budget for with the TISA money and the county money, but then we've got this potential some odd money that we're supposed to get from the voucher stuff,
The capital.
capital voucher.
I don't see that in, when I look through the document, I don't see that in the TISA number that we gave.
No, it's not in TISA. It was part of the legislation that passed with the special
I guess
session.
what I'm saying on this is like, hey, we've got stuff that we're gonna put in the budget, but also in the capital plan, have some idea of what we could use a potential windfall pay,
Right.
because we don't,
Well, and what's that? I have no idea. I haven't seen any. It's in the plan, but I don't know what the number is and what the qualifiers are.
Yeah.
It's still very much in the sausage making stage.
all right, thank you.
Mr. Lacy?
When did you say, or we should be able to, I guess, we'll have the bids for North Summer Elementary?
Tuesday week, the 11th. Yeah, not Tuesday week. Tuesday, next Tuesday. But yeah, Mr. Lancaster, I think, and I actually like what Ms. Brown did this year, that the county does too, is pulling capital out into a separate line so we can see it throughout the budget, because that's going to be an important thing to watch.
All right. Next item on the agenda, discussion of policy 1.2021, board norms prior to first reading.
Yeah, this is just on here and going to continue to be on here till you guys feel good about it and say you want to vote on it. So if you want to talk about it, great. If you don't, that's great too.
Have we done it? I'm sorry. I didn't have the floor. I was used to talking.
I have not received any feedback from board members about edits. That's,
Does this still say the same thing it did say on, the problem I had, one problem I had with it was, except the will of the majority of vote. I don't remember if that's the same.
if you've got suggestions, feel free to email me and Mr. Johnson, and we can make those edits as needed and continue to discuss it as a board.
And I mean, I guess my other question, this is just 7 things that are listed as board norms. I mean, what does this mean? That's,
Means this is how we are planning to act as a board.
well, I guess I get that. I mean, but there's no consequence. I mean,
There's
as a 43-year-old man, I'm like, well,
This is, yeah,
I
this
don't
is,
necessarily think I need a guideline.
yeah, this is how we act like adults together,
Okay.
is what this says, the way I look at it.
Okay, but there's no.
There's no ethics committee, there's no, this is us as a board saying, when we come together, when we discuss items, the way we treat each other with respect, We're just kind of outlining what we as a board believe, how we should act towards each other when discussing items, and you know, discussing our beliefs on certain topics that may come up.
Okay.
Ms. Charles?
I think that was a good clarification. I know I had one person reach out to me, and I've seen some comments that this may have been misperceived generally about maybe an attempt to stifle, you know, speech or amongst us or even teachers. So I think that was the clarification that I was giving, was this is just norms of how we agree to act so we can be productive and professional. And if there's any kind of controversy, we can handle that privately and move along. So I think that was a good clarification.
Well, and one thing to remember, these are 7 items that we as a board came up with, how we felt we should act and conduct ourselves. Mr. Evans?
So if we don't, if these go through, we don't pass them as a board, or if we don't, from a TSBA standpoint, we don't, nothing happens with us in TSBA if we don't have board norms. Like, they can't do anything or make us enforce any.
Correct.
Yeah, there's no legal requirement.
But that's what I'm making sure. Like, we don't have to have them.
No, this was just an exercise we thought would be useful for your board retreat. You know, you can adopt them, you can not adopt them. I'm not aware of any legal requirement where you have to have them. It's just a discussion, and, you know, happy to work with anybody for any revisions. They can say what you want them to say.
Well, and I think the other reason that we brought this up as the activity during our board retreat was because we had so many new members. We wanted to get feedback and discussion on how we wanted to act as a group and conduct ourselves. And again, this is as a board, are the items that we came up with. I mean, I know they've been wordsmithed a little bit, but the topics I think themselves are pretty general and pretty generic. And like I said, when I look at this and I read through this, it just to me says, this is how we should act and treat each other with respect as adults. And this is how I think I would want people to see us acting. You know, I mentioned this before at one of our board meetings, that sometimes I look at the way we treat each other, the way we act, not just in here, and the way we talk to each other, the way we act on social media. Sometimes it's embarrassing. And then we wonder why our kids act the way they do. And so I think this just kind of gives us the opportunity to say, these are our standards, these are our expectations, this is how we believe we should act. And hopefully everyone, if we were to pass this, even if we did pass this, I would hope that everyone looked at this and say, hey, you know what, this is something that I would want to strive to as a person, as a member of this community, whether I'm on board or not. Mr. Lacy?
Yeah, I was just, to me, it seems, some of it seems kind of redundant. We also have a board policy 1.202 that already says a lot of the same stuff in it already. So why have it in there? Why make another policy that says the same thing?
Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, anything else? All right, meeting adjourned.